The fluorescent lights of St. Jude's Trauma Center buzzed like angry wasps at 11:52 on a Thursday night. The kind of night where the air tasted metallic, where every breath felt borrowed, where death waited in the wings with patient hands. Sarah Mitchell pushed her supply cart down the polished hallway, the squeak of one bad wheel marking her passage like a metronome counting down to something she couldn't name. Her scrubs hung loose on a frame that had once been 30 pounds heavier back when she ate 3 meals a day instead of coffee and whatever the vending machine offered at 2 in the morning. Her hands, those trader hands, trembled slightly as she restocked gauze pads into the dispenser outside Trauma Bay 1. 45 years old and invisible. That's what she'd become in the 3 months since St. Jude's had hired her. The night shift nurse nobody remembered. The one who restocked supplies, changed bedding, sanitized surfaces, while the real nurses, the young ones with their energy drinks and their social media and their perfect steady hands, saved lives under the bright lights. She didn't complain. Complaining was for people who expected the world to care. Sarah had stopped expecting that a long time ago. Behind her, the trauma bay doors exploded open with a violence that made the security guard jump. Two paramedics burst through, faces pale, uniforms dark with someone else's blood. Between them, a gurney carrying what looked less like a man and more like a question mark written in torn flesh and shattered bone. Male, early 40s, multiple gunshot wounds to the chest and abdomen. The lead paramedic's voice cracked like breaking glass. "We lost his pulse twice in transit. Trauma activation now. Now." The hallway transformed into controlled chaos. Residents sprinting from the break room. Nurses abandoning their stations. The overhead speaker crackling to life with codes Sarah had memorized years ago in a different life, under different lights in places that weren't supposed to exist on any map. Dr. Julian Thorne arrived like a man stepping onto a stage, all confidence and expensive cologne. 35 years old, Harvard-educated with an Instagram following that rivaled some minor celebrities. He snapped on gloves with the precision of someone who'd practiced the gesture in a mirror. "Talk to me." Thorne's voice carried the calm authority of someone who'd never actually been shot at. "What's the story of training accident?" The paramedic wouldn't meet his eyes. "That's all they told us." Sarah's hands stopped moving. Training accident. She'd heard that phrase before. In Kandahar, in Fallujah, in places where training accident meant something had gone wrong in ways that would never make it into any official report, where young men died for reasons that would be classified for the next 50 years. She looked at the man on the gurney as they wheeled him past. His face was gray, lips blue, but even unconscious, even dying, there was something about the way he held himself. The muscle memory of a body that had been trained to respond, to fight, to survive. And his hands. Sarah noticed hands. Always had. These hands had scars in all the right places. Rope burns on the palms, calluses from holding a rifle in a proper grip for hours at a time. The kind of hands that belonged to someone who understood that violence wasn't a movie, it was a craft. She should know. Her own hands started shaking harder. Sarah gripped the cart handle and forced herself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The technique she'd learned in a different uniform, in a different decade, when her hands had been steady as stone, and her call sign had been Angel, and she'd believed she could save everyone if she just worked hard enough. That was before the IED, before the medical discharge, before the quiet apartment with the daughter away at college, and the nights that stretched too long, and the tremor that never quite went away. "Clear the bay," Thorne's voice cut through her thoughts. "I want 4 units of O-negative stat. Get me a central line kit and someone find me a goddamn ultrasound. Move, people, move." Sarah moved, not toward the bay, but toward the shadows. Back to her cart, back to her supplies, back to being invisible. That was the deal she'd made with herself 3 years ago, when the VA had finally signed off on her discharge papers. No more heroics, no more missions, no more being the person everyone counted on when everything went to hell. She'd been that person for 20 years. It had cost her everything. Inside the trauma bay, machine screamed, the high-pitched wail of a monitor detecting what human ears couldn't admit. Flatline, the universal sound of failure. "He's crashing." A young resident's voice climbed toward panic. "Dr. Thorne, he's coding." "Start compressions. Someone bag him." "Where's my central line?" Sarah's feet stopped moving. She stood in the hallway, her cart beside her, and listened to the sound of a man dying. Listened to the chaos of people who meant well but didn't understand. Who'd been trained in simulation labs and quiet classrooms, but had never felt the weight of a life slipping away under their hands while mortars fell and bullets cracked overhead. They were doing the compressions wrong. She could hear it in the rhythm. Too fast, too shallow, bouncing instead of compressing. Circulating nothing. Her hands gripped the cart handle until her knuckles went white. Not your problem, she told herself. Not your patient. Not your responsibility. But her feet were already moving. Sarah abandoned the cart and walked toward the trauma bay. Not running, never running, because running meant panic and panic meant mistakes. She walked with the measured pace of someone who'd done this so many times that muscle memory took over when conscious thought failed. Through the glass partition, she could see everything. The patient on the table chest, exposed skin the color of old concrete. Dr. Thorne at the head, fumbling with an intubation kit, sweat beading on his forehead. The young resident doing compressions that wouldn't save a drowning goldfish. Nurses scattering like frightened birds, grabbing equipment, dropping equipment, asking questions nobody was answering. Sarah pushed through the door. The sound hit her first. The alarms, the shouting, the mechanical hiss of the ventilator someone had set up wrong. Then the smell. Blood and antiseptic and the sharp copper tang of adrenaline sweat. She moved to the table. "Excuse me?" Her voice was quiet, almost gentle. "You're doing the compressions wrong." The resident looked up confused. "Who the hell are—" "Step aside." Sarah's voice didn't get louder, it just changed. Dropped an octave, lost the gentleness, became the voice of someone who expected to be obeyed because disobedience meant people died. The resident stepped aside. Sarah placed her hands on the patient's chest, felt for the landmarks. Xiphoid process sternum, the proper placement that she could find blindfolded in a sandstorm while incoming fire turned the world into a percussion of death. She compressed. Deep. Controlled. 100 beats per minute. The proper rhythm. The one that actually circulated blood instead of just making people feel like they were doing something useful. "What is happening right now, doctor?" Thorne looked up from his intubation attempt, his face a mixture of confusion and outrage. "Who authorized—" "Shut up and intubate him." Sarah didn't look away from her work. "You're wasting time." The room went silent. In 15 years of practicing medicine at St. Jude's, nobody had ever told Dr. Julian Thorne to shut up. Not the nurses, not the residents, certainly not a supply clerk in oversized scrubs who looked like someone's grandmother. Thorne's face went red. "Security. Look at the monitor." Sarah's voice was still calm, still that strange command voice that didn't belong in a civilian hospital. "His blood pressure is rising. My compressions are working. Yours weren't. So you can either throw me out and watch him die, or you can do your job and intubate." Thorne looked at the monitor. The blood pressure, which had been a flat line, showed a weak but rising curve. 60/40. Not good. Not even close to good. But alive. He grabbed the laryngoscope. Sarah compressed 30 times, then stopped for 2 breaths from the bag valve mask a nurse held ready, then 30 more compressions. The rhythm never varied. Her hands never shook. Not now, not when it mattered. "I've got the tube." Thorne's voice was tight, inflating the cuff. Someone confirmed placement. A nurse listened with a stethoscope. "Bilateral breath sounds. Good placement." Sarah kept compressing. Something was wrong. She could feel it. The chest felt wrong under her hands, too much resistance on the left side. And the blood pressure, even with proper compressions, wasn't rising fast enough. She stopped, looked at the patient's chest. There, on the left side, the slight bulge, the trachea deviating to the right. "He's got a tension pneumothorax." Sarah's voice cut through the noise. "Left side, you need to needle decompress him now." Dr. Thorne stared at her. "How could you possibly—" "Second intercostal space mid-clavicular line. Get me a 14-gauge angiocath and get it now." A nurse, the older one, who'd been working trauma for 30 years and knew when to listen, slapped the needle into Sarah's palm. Sarah found the landmark, the space between the second and third ribs just below the collarbone. She could do this blind, had done it blind in the dark with nothing but a headlamp and the sound of someone dying, and the knowledge that if she missed, if her hands shook, if she hesitated for even a second, another name would get added to the list of people she couldn't save. She pushed the needle through skin, through muscle, through the intercostal space. There was resistance. Then a pop. Then a hiss. Air rushing out of the pleural space where it had been building pressure, collapsing the lung, pushing the heart to the side, killing the patient one squeezed beat at a time. The hiss went on for 5 seconds. Then 10. The monitor changed. Blood pressure climbing. 70/40. 80/50. Oxygen saturation rising from the low 80s into the 90s. The patient gasped. A real breath. His first in minutes. Sarah pulled the needle secured it, stepped back. Her hands were shaking again. She stripped off the gloves she'd pulled on without thinking and dropped them in the bin. Her scrub top was dark with sweat. Her heart hammered against her ribs like something trying to escape. "Who are you?" Derthorn's voice was barely a whisper. Sarah didn't answer. She walked toward the door, her limp more pronounced now, the old injury in her hip flaring with the adrenaline crash that always followed. The pain that reminded her why she'd left, why she couldn't do this anymore, why being invisible was safer than being needed. Behind her, the patient's vital signs continued to stabilize. Behind her, a room full of medical professionals stared at the night shift supply clerk who'd just done what none of them had been trained to do. Behind her, Dr. Tior. Thorne looked at his hands, at his expensive education, at his Instagram followers, and realized that none of it meant anything when someone was actually dying. Sarah pushed through the door and back into the hallway. The supply cart was where she'd left it, one wheel still squeaking, gauze pads still needing to be restocked. She gripped the handle and started pushing. "Hey." The voice made her stop. She turned. The patient on the gurney, the one who'd been dead 3 minutes ago, had his eyes open. Just barely. Just enough to see her through the glass. He was looking at her. And then with a hand that barely moved, with fingers that could barely bend, he did something that made Sarah's blood run cold. He saluted. It wasn't a full salute. Wasn't even close. Just fingers touching forehead. The abbreviated gesture of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. Someone who recognized the look in another person's eyes. The look that said, "Warrior." The look that said, "I've been there." The look that said, "I know who you are even if nobody else does." Sarah's throat closed. She nodded. Once. Sharp. Then she turned and pushed her cart down the hallway, the squeak of the bad wheel following her into the shadows. Behind her in the trauma bay, Dr. Thorne was already crafting the story he'd tell tomorrow. About how he'd managed the airway. How he'd directed the team. How his quick thinking had saved a life. Behind her, the patient closed his eyes and drifted back into unconsciousness, his mind holding on to one thought, the woman with the gray eyes, and the steady hands and the technique he'd only ever seen in one place. Downrange, where the only nurses were the ones who could shoot back. Sarah made it to the supply closet before her legs gave out. She sat on a box of disposable bedpans and put her head in her hands and breathed until the shaking stopped. Her phone buzzed. A text from her daughter. "Hey Mom, just checking in. How's the shift? Love you." Sarah stared at the message for a long time, then typed back with trembling fingers. "Quiet night. Love you too, sweetie." She put the phone away. Quiet night. The lie tasted like ash. The break room at 6 in the morning smelled like burned coffee and broken dreams. Sarah sat at the small table in the corner, the one nobody else wanted because it faced the wall and had a wobbly leg. She ate a granola bar that tasted like cardboard and watched the morning shift filter in. They didn't see her. They never did. Dr. Thorne held court at the main table, surrounded by residents and nurses who laughed at his jokes and hung on his words. He was telling the story, his version, the one where he was the hero. So the patient code's right, total chaos, everyone freezing up. Thorne leaned back in his chair, hands behind his head. "I see the tension, pneumo immediately. Direct the nurse to prep the needle. Decompress the chest myself. Textbook save." The residents nodded, taking mental notes. "What about the supply clerk?" One of the younger nurses spoke up. "Emily something, 24 years old, fresh out of school, still believed in heroes. I heard she did the compressions, that she identified the pneumothorax." Thorne waved a hand dismissively. "She helped. I'm not saying she didn't help, but she's not trained for advanced procedures. I had to direct her every step of the way. Honestly, it was dangerous having her in there. If I hadn't been monitoring everything." He let the implication hang. Sarah took another bite of her granola bar. She'd heard this story before. Different hospital, different doctors, same ending. The invisible people stayed invisible. The heroes got the headlines. That was fine. She didn't want headlines. She wanted to finish her shift, go home, sleep for 4 hours, and do it again tomorrow. "Ms. Mitchell." The voice made her look up. Administrator David Lancaster stood in the doorway. 48 years old, MBA, from Wharton suit that cost more than Sarah made in a month. He had the smile of someone about to deliver bad news and call it an opportunity. "My office, now please." Sarah stood, threw away the half-eaten granola bar, followed Lancaster down the hallway to the administrative wing, where the floors were carpeted and the lighting was warm and everything felt like a corporate boardroom instead of a place where people bled. Lancaster's office was all glass and chrome, efficiency charts on the walls, Photographs of him shaking hands with donors, politicians, anyone with money. His desk was clean, except for a single manila folder. Sit, Lancaster gestured to the chair across from him. Sarah remained standing. Lancaster sighed. Last night, the trauma bay, Dr. Thorne filed a report. I'm sure he did. He says you physically pushed aside a resident, that you performed advanced medical procedures you're not licensed to perform in this facility, that you created a liability situation that could have resulted in a lawsuit. Sarah's jaw tightened. The patient lived. That's not the point. Lancaster opened the folder. You're a registered nurse, Ms. Mitchell. Your license allows you to work under the direction of a physician, not to make independent medical decisions, not to perform procedures like needle decompression without authorization. The patient was dying. Dr. Thorne was managing the situation. Dr. Thorne was about to kill him with incorrect compressions. Lancaster's smile vanished. That's quite an accusation. It's quite an observation. Silence filled the office like water filling a sinking ship. Lancaster leaned forward. Let me be direct, Ms. Mitchell. You're 45 years old. You work part-time night shifts. You don't fit the demographic this hospital is trying to project. We're rebranding. Younger staff, tech-savvy, social media friendly. The board wants to attract millennial patients, and they want a staff that reflects that. Sarah's hands clenched at her sides. You're firing me for being old. I'm suggesting that you might be happier somewhere else. A smaller facility, a nursing home perhaps, somewhere where your particular skills would be more appreciated. My particular skills saved that man's life. Your particular skills created a liability. Lancaster closed the folder. I'm giving you a choice. Resign quietly with a neutral reference. Or we terminate you for insubordination and policy violation, and that goes on your permanent record. Sarah looked at the man across the desk, at his expensive suit and his empty smile and his charts about efficiency and cost reduction. At the face of every administrator who'd ever told her that rules mattered more than results, that paperwork mattered more than people. She'd met 1,000 David Lancasters in her career. In the military, they were the officers who stayed in the rear and made decisions that got soldiers killed. In civilian life, they were the administrators who cared more about liability than lives. How long do I have to decide? Her voice was flat. End of the week. Lancaster's smile returned. I'm sure you'll make the right choice. Sarah walked out without another word. The hallway felt longer than it had on the way in. Her hip ached. Her hands shook. The fluorescent lights hummed their wasp song overhead. She'd come to St. Jude's 3 months ago because she'd needed something to do. Because retirement at 42 had felt like death. Because sitting in her apartment with nothing but memories and regret was slowly killing her in ways that bullets and IEDs never had. Now she was being pushed out again. Too old, too much liability, too different. The story of her life. Sarah made it to the parking lot before the tears came. She sat in her 12-year-old Honda Civic and cried silent tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. The kind of crying that didn't make noise because she'd learned a long time ago that tears were a luxury you couldn't afford when someone might hear. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but old habits died hard, and in her old life, unknown numbers had meant mission updates, emergency calls, things that mattered. She answered, Mitchell. Is this Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, formerly of the 24th Special Tactics Squadron? The voice was official, military, the kind of voice that didn't waste time on small talk. Sarah's spine straightened without conscious thought. I'm retired, sir. This is Colonel Michael Hayes, Joint Special Operations Command. The man you saved last night is Commander Marcus Hayes, my brother, and I need to speak with you about something that can't wait. Sarah closed her eyes. Of course it couldn't wait. It never could. I'm listening, she said, and just like that, retirement was over. The VA hospital parking lot at 9 in the morning looked like a graveyard for American dreams. Cracked asphalt, faded parking lines, a building that had seen better decades. Sarah pulled into a spot near the entrance and sat for a moment watching old men in wheelchairs smoke cigarettes by the door, their faces carved from the same stone as the memorial plaques on the wall inside. She'd been coming here on weekends for the past year. Volunteer work, helping with intake running groups for vets with PTSD, teaching basic medical skills to younger guys just back from deployment. It was the only place where her hands stopped shaking, the only place where nobody asked questions about who she used to be, because they already knew. You couldn't fake it here, couldn't pretend. The old vets had a sixth sense for bullshit, could smell a poser from across the room. But when Sarah walked through those doors, they nodded, called her by her call sign, the one that had followed her through 3 deployments and 400 saves. Angel. She hated that name now, hated what it represented, hated the weight of expectation that came with it. But she wore it anyway because that's what you did. You carried the weight until it buried you. Sarah grabbed her bag and headed inside. The building smelled like industrial cleaner, an old coffee, and something else she could never quite name. History, maybe, or ghosts. The walls were covered with photographs. Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. Faces frozen in time, some of them still alive, most of them not. She signed in at the front desk. The receptionist, a woman named Carol who'd been working here since Carter was president, looked up with tired eyes. "Morning, Sarah. Jack's been asking about you." "Jack's always asking about something," Carol smiled. "He's in the training room. Got a new batch of medics he's terrorizing." Sarah walked down the familiar hallway, past the clinic rooms, past the group therapy offices, past the memorial wall with its endless list of names. She didn't look at the names anymore. Looking meant remembering, and remembering meant feeling, and feeling was a luxury she'd given up the day her convoy hit that IED outside Kandahar. The training room was at the end of the hall. Through the small window in the door, she could see Jack Morrison holding court in front of 6 young corpsmen, all of them in their early 20s, all of them hanging on his every word. Jack was 65 years old and looked like someone had carved him from oak and forgotten to sand down the rough edges. Gray hair in a military high and tight, face weathered by decades of sun and wind and things that left marks you couldn't see. He wore jeans and a faded Ranger tab t-shirt and moved with the careful precision of someone who'd learned that wasted motion could get you killed. Sarah had met Jack 18 months ago at a veterans support group she'd been forced to attend as part of her medical discharge. She'd sat in the back arms, crossed, determined not to speak. Jack had sat next to her and said exactly 6 words the entire hour. "Coffee after, my treat, don't argue." They'd been having coffee every weekend since. He was the closest thing she had to a father figure, which was funny because her actual father had died when she was 12, and she'd spent the next 30 years proving she didn't need anyone to fill that role. But Jack had a way of seeing through the walls she'd built, of knowing when to push and when to shut up and sit beside her in comfortable silence. Sarah pushed open the door. 6 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Jack didn't turn. He was in the middle of demonstrating a pressure dressing on a training dummy, his hands steady and sure. And if you're working in a vehicle and you don't have proper supplies, you use what you've got. T-shirt, belt, duct tape if that's all there is. The equipment doesn't save lives. You save lives. The equipment just makes it easier. Jack finished the dressing, then looked up. "Angel, about time." The young medic's eyes widened. They'd heard stories. In the military medical community, everyone had heard stories about Angel, the only woman to complete the pararescue pipeline. 400 combat saves. 3 Bronze Stars and a Silver Star she'd never bothered to pick up from the awards office because she'd been deployed again before the ceremony. Sarah ignored their stares. "You wanted to see me? Class dismissed." Jack pointed to the door. "Read chapters 7 and 8. Quiz on Monday. If you fail, you run the obstacle course in full gear." The medics filed out, stealing glances at Sarah as they went. She heard whispered questions as the door closed behind them. "Is that really her? I heard she carried a guy 8 miles through enemy territory. I heard she talked a pilot through an emergency tracheotomy over the radio while under fire." The stories got bigger every year. The truth was impressive enough. She didn't need the embellishment. Jack waited until the door clicked shut. Then he looked at her with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "You look like hell." "Good morning to you too. When's the last time you slept?" "I sleep. Nightmares don't count." Jack crossed his arms. "What happened?" Sarah sat on one of the training tables. Her hip throbbed. 3 years since the injury, and it still hurt when the weather changed, when she was tired, when she moved wrong. The doctors had said she was lucky to walk at all. She'd told them luck had nothing to do with it. Spite, maybe. Stubbornness, definitely. "I saved a guy last night, a SEAL commander. Multiple GSWs, tension pneumothorax. He was coding. And let me guess, you stepped in, fixed the problem, made the ER doctors look incompetent." "I made them look exactly as competent as they were." Jack almost smiled. And now the administrator wants me to resign, says I'm a liability. Too old, too much risk, doesn't fit their demographic. "So quit." Sarah looked up sharply. "What? You hate it there? You've hated it since day one. They don't appreciate you. They don't see you. Why stay?" Because I need the work. Because sitting at home staring at the walls makes me want to drive my car off a bridge. Because I'm 45 years old with a medical discharge and a daughter in college. And I need to feel useful. Jack walked over and sat beside her on the table. For a long moment, he said nothing. Just sat there in that comfortable silence he was so good at. Then he spoke, his voice quiet. You know what your problem is? I have several. You'll need to be more specific. You're still trying to prove you belong. Still trying to earn respect from people who are never going to give it. You spent 20 years being the best at what you do, and you're still acting like you need permission to exist. Sarah's jaw tightened. That's not... I trained, you remember, back when you were this scared 23-year-old who showed up to selection with something to prove. You were the first woman in that pipeline, and you knew every man there was waiting for you to fail. So you worked twice as hard, never complained, never asked for help, just kept your head down and did the work until even the biggest assholes had to admit you belonged. I remember. And now you're doing the same thing, taking shit from some hospital administrator who wouldn't last 5 minutes doing what you do, accepting insults from doctors who panic the second something goes off script, acting like you're lucky to have the job when they should be begging you to stay. Sarah looked at her hands, at the scars on her knuckles, at the slight tremor she could never quite hide. My hands shake, Jack. I'm not who I was. No, you're better because you've seen what happens when the system fails, when training isn't enough, when the person in charge freezes and people die because of it. Jack stood up. You want to know what I think? Do I have a choice? I think that SEAL commander last night recognized something in you, something that administrator and those ER doctors will never see. And I think there's a reason Colonel Hayes called you this morning. Sarah's head snapped up. How did you? Because I got a call too, from an old friend at JSOC who wanted to know if I thought Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell was still operational. Jack's eyes were steady. They need you, Angel, not the broken down version you've convinced yourself you are, the real version, the one who never left Rangers behind. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. Another text from Colonel Hayes. Commander Hayes is awake, asking for you specifically. Safe house location attached. Come alone, tell no one. Below the message was an address. An abandoned wing of this very VA hospital, the part they'd closed down 3 years ago when funding dried up. Sarah stood. Her hip protested. She ignored it. Jack, I know, you're retired. You have a daughter. You've done your time. Jack walked to the equipment lockers and pulled out a tactical medical bag. The good kind, stocked with supplies that weren't in any civilian hospital. But you're going anyway, because that's who you are. That's who you've always been. He held out the bag. Sarah took it. One condition, Jack said. You don't do this alone. You need backup, you call me. You need someone who understands, you call me. You need someone to tell you you're not crazy for walking back into this, you call me. Sarah's throat tightened. I'm not pulling you into something dangerous. Too late. I've been in dangerous since 1968. At this point, it's comfortable. Jack's expression softened just slightly. Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't do anything stupid. Might as well be me. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to tell him this wasn't his fight, that she could handle it alone. But the truth was she was tired of handling everything alone. Tired of pretending she didn't need backup. Tired of the wait. Okay, she said quietly. Jack nodded. Good. Now go see what the SEAL commander wants. I'll be here. An angel. He waited until she looked at him. Stop apologizing for being good at what you do. Stop making yourself small so other people feel big. You earned your place 20 years ago. Act like it. Sarah left the training room with the medical bag slung over her shoulder and Jack's words echoing in her head. The hallway felt different now. Brighter, maybe. Or maybe she was just seeing it differently. The abandoned wing was accessed through a service door near the loading dock. Sarah keyed in the code Colonel Hayes had sent, and the lock clicked open. The door swung inward with a groan that echoed down the empty corridor beyond. The lights were off, but emergency lighting along the floor cast everything in a dim red glow. The air smelled stale, like a place that had been closed too long. Dust motes danced in the thin beams of light that leaked through boarded windows. Sarah's hand instinctively went to her hip where she used to carry a sidearm. Found nothing. She hadn't carried a weapon in 3 years. Probably should have thought of that before walking into an abandoned building to meet someone she didn't know about a situation she didn't understand. Old habits died hard, but apparently common sense died harder. She moved down the corridor, her footsteps silent on the linoleum floor. Years of tactical movement training meant she knew how to walk without making noise, how to clear corners, how to read a space for threats. The skills came back like muscle memory, like her body remembered even if her mind wanted to forget. At the end of the corridor, light spilled from an open doorway. Sarah approached back to the wall medical bag, ready to use as an improvised weapon if needed. Then she heard a voice from inside the room. "You can come in, Lieutenant. If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't have made it past the first door." Sarah stepped into the doorway. The room had been set up as a makeshift medical suite. Hospital bed monitors on voice stands. Commander Marcus Hayes lay in the bed, his chest wrapped in fresh bandages, his face still pale, but no longer the gray color of death. Two men stood guard by the far wall. Not regular military, private contractors maybe, or JSOC operators in civilian clothes. Hayes watched her with eyes that had seen too much and remembered everything. "Lieutenant Mitchell, thank you for coming." "I'm not a lieutenant anymore. Haven't been for 3 years. Once a PJ, always a PJ." Hayes gestured to the chair beside his bed. "Sit, please. Standing makes me nervous, and I'm not supposed to be nervous. Doctor's orders." Sarah sat, keeping the medical bag in her lap. "Your brother said you needed to speak with me. I needed to thank you for last night, for Kandahar, for every time in between." Hayes shifted in the bed, wincing. "You saved my life twice. Most people don't get a second chance. I'm on number 3. What happened last night wasn't a training accident." "No, it wasn't." Hayes looked at the two men by the wall, then back to Sarah. "What I'm about to tell you is classified. Telling you puts you at risk. But you deserve to know because someone already tried to kill me once in that hospital. They'll try again." Sarah's hands tightened on the medical bag. "I'm listening." Hayes took a careful breath. 3 weeks ago, my team was tasked with a routine training exercise in the mountains outside Fort Bragg. Simple navigation course. No live fire, no enemy force, just basic skills maintenance. Except someone changed the coordinates, sent us into an area that hadn't been cleared for training, an area where certain people were conducting the certain operations that weren't supposed to be happening on U.S. soil. You walked into something you weren't supposed to see. We walked into a meeting. Defense contractors, Pentagon officials, people in suits with briefcases full of documents. When they saw us, they opened fire. Killed 3 of my men, wounded 4 others. I only made it out because I had evidence of what they were doing. Hayes reached under his pillow and pulled out a small USB drive. $2 billion in fraudulent defense contracts, ghost shipments, fake equipment orders, money being funneled to offshore accounts. It goes all the way up. Congress, Pentagon brass, contractors with more power than most elected officials. Sarah stared at the small drive. Such a tiny thing to be worth killing for. And they want that drive. They want me dead. The drive is secondary. As long as I'm alive to testify, the evidence holds up in court. If I die, it's just data that could be faked, could be fabricated, could be anything. Where's the rest of your team? Scattered, in hiding, safe houses across 3 states. We don't know who we can trust. Command structure is compromised. Chain of evidence is compromised. We're on our own until the FBI finishes building their case, and that could take months. Sarah processed this, processed the implications, processed what it meant that Hayes had asked for her specifically. Why am I here? Because someone got into my hospital room last night. Someone with medical access. Someone who knew exactly which medications to use, exactly how to make it look like natural complications from my injuries. They put a syringe of succinylcholine in my IV port. If the nurse hadn't found it during rounds, I'd be dead. The words settled in Sarah's chest like ice. You think there's someone inside the hospital? I think there's someone everywhere, in the hospital, in the command structure, in the FBI office handling our case. I think this thing is bigger than anyone realizes, and I think the only people I can trust are the ones who've been where I've been, who understand what it means when the mission goes sideways and the people in charge leave you to die. Hayes met her eyes. I trust you because you carried me 3 clicks through enemy fire when my entire team was pinned down. Because you didn't leave me when leaving would have been easier. Because your call sign is Angel, and everyone knows that angels don't abandon their wounded. Sarah's hands started shaking again. The tremor she couldn't control, couldn't hide. I'm not that person anymore. I'm broken. Medical discharge, PTSD. I can barely make it through a night shift without falling apart. Good, Hayes said, because I need someone who knows what broken feels like. Someone who understands that the system is flawed. Someone who won't trust the official channels because they've seen what happens when the official channels fail. One of the men by the wall stepped forward. He was massive, 6'5", built like he'd been assembled from spare tank parts. Beard scars, eyes that tracked everything. "Commander, we need to move soon. Windows closing." Hayes nodded. "Lieutenant Mitchell, this is Chief Warrant Officer Ryan Hendricks. We call him Dutch for short. He's coordinating security." Well, Dutch looked at Sarah with open skepticism. "This is your guardian angel. No offense, ma'am, but you look like you're about to collapse." "None taken." Sarah set down her medical bag. "You look like you eat small children for breakfast, but I'm trying not to judge." Hayes laughed, then winced. "See? She's perfect." "For what exactly?" Sarah looked between them. "What do you need from me?" "Protection, medical support, someone who can think tactically, someone who knows how to disappear when necessary." Hayes shifted in the bed. "They're going to keep coming. The next attempt will be more direct, more violent. I need someone who can keep me alive long enough for the FBI to finish their case. Someone who's not in any official database, someone they won't see coming." Sarah stood up, paced to the window, looked out at the parking lot at the old vets smoking their cigarettes at the memorial plaques on the wall. She thought about her daughter, about the quiet life she'd tried to build, about the promise she'd made to herself 3 years ago that she was done being a soldier. She thought about her apartment, about the nights she couldn't sleep, about the feeling of being invisible, useless, a burden. She thought about Lancaster's words, about being too old, too damaged, too much liability. And she thought about Jack's words, about earning her place, about stop apologizing for being good at what she did. Sarah turned back to Hayes. "If I do this, I have conditions." "Name them." "I don't work alone. I bring backup. Someone I trust. Former Ranger Vietnam vet knows more about tactical medicine than anyone alive." "Jack Morrison." Hayes smiled. "Already cleared him. He's been read in on the situation." Sarah blinked. "You knew I'd say yes." "I hoped. There's a difference." Hayes gestured to Dutch. "Show her." Dutch pulled out a tablet and pulled up security footage. The timestamp showed last night the hospital, the corridor outside Hayes's room. A figure in scrubs walked toward the door. Moved like hospital staff. Carried a small bag like hospital staff. But something was wrong, the way they moved. The precision, the tactical awareness. The figure entered Hayes's room. The camera inside caught them approaching the IV port, pulling out the syringe, injecting it into the line. Then the figure's head turned, looked directly at the camera for just a second, long enough for the image to be captured. Sarah's blood went cold. The face was familiar. Not someone she knew personally, but someone she recognized. The bone structure, the build, the way they carried themselves. Military, special operations, someone with training. "We ran facial recognition," Dutch said. "Came back classified. Whatever unit this person is with, it's buried deep. Black ops, deniable, off the books." Hayes's voice was quiet. "They sent a professional Sarah, not some contractor, not some hired gun, someone from inside the military, someone who knows how we operate, someone who's probably killed a dozen targets exactly like this." Sarah looked at the frozen image on the screen, at the cold efficiency in those eyes. "And you think I can stop someone like that? I think you're the only one who can because you think like them. You've been there. You know how they'll move, how they'll plan, how they'll adapt when things go wrong." Hayes's expression was steady. "I'm not asking you to be a superhero. I'm asking you to be what you've always been. A guardian. Someone who stands between the wounded and the people trying to kill them." Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from her daughter. "Mom forgot to tell you, coming home this weekend. Want to make sure you're okay. Love you." She stared at the message, at the simple request, at the worry her daughter tried to hide behind casual words. If Sarah said yes to this, she was putting herself in danger, was walking back into the world she'd promised to leave behind, was risking everything she'd built in the 3 years since her discharge. But if she said no, Commander Hayes would die. The corruption would continue. More soldiers would die in training accidents that weren't accidents. And Sarah would go back to her quiet apartment and her night shifts in the slow drowning feeling of being invisible. She looked up at Hayes. "How long do we have?" "FBI says 3 weeks, maybe 4. They're building an airtight case, but these people have lawyers and connections and enough money to make problems disappear." "And you think they'll wait that long to try again?" "I think they'll try within 72 hours. I think they've already identified everyone on my protection detail. I think they know where we are right now. Hayes held her gaze. I think we're running out of time. Sarah picked up her medical bag. Check the supplies Jack had packed. Combat gauze, chest seals, tourniquets, everything she'd need if things went bad, when things went bad. Okay, she said. I'm in, but we do this my way. No official channels, no command structure. We work off the books, use resources they can't track, stay mobile. Agreed. And when this is over, you make sure my daughter never knows what really happened. As far as she's concerned, I spent 3 weeks working overtime at the hospital. Hayes nodded. You have my word. Sarah slung the medical bag over her shoulder. Then let's get to work. First thing we need is a better location. This place is compromised. They knew you were at the hospital, which means they're tracking your movements. We need somewhere off-grid, somewhere they won't think to look. Dutch raised an eyebrow. You have somewhere in mind. Sarah thought about Jack, about the network of veterans who passed through the VA hospital, about the old soldiers who still remembered what loyalty meant, about the places that existed in the gaps between official records. Yeah, she said, I know a place, but we'll need help moving him, and we'll need to do it now before they realize we're leaving. She pulled out her phone and dialed Jack. He answered on the first ring. Angel, I need the last guard, all of them. Tell them it's a mission. Tell them one of our own needs extraction. Tell them we move in 30 minutes. There was a pause. Then Jack's voice came back steady and certain. On it. I'll have them ready. Sarah hung up and looked at Hayes. You asked for a guardian. You're getting 7. The safe house Jack had arranged turned out to be a farmhouse, 40 minutes outside the city, owned by a widow whose husband had served 3 tours in Vietnam and died of Agent Orange complications 15 years after coming home. She'd turned the property into an unofficial sanctuary for veterans who needed a place to disappear for a while. No questions asked, no records kept, just a place where soldiers could breathe without looking over their shoulders. Sarah helped Dutch and the other security operators get Hayes settled in the main bedroom on the first floor. The room had good sight lines, one entrance windows that had been reinforced with security film. Not perfect, but better than a hospital where anyone with a stolen ID badge could walk right in. Hayes winced as they transferred him from the wheelchair to the bed. His vitals were stable, but not good. Blood pressure still low. Oxygen saturation acceptable, but not ideal. The chest tube was draining properly, but infection was a constant risk. He needed to be in a real hospital with real equipment and real doctors. Instead, he had Sarah a bag full of supplies and a house full of old soldiers. How's the pain? Sarah checked his IV line, adjusted the drip rate. Manageable. Hayes' jaw was tight. He was lying. The pain wasn't manageable. It was probably screaming through every nerve. But admitting weakness wasn't something men like Hayes knew how to do. Sarah had known 100 Marcus Hayes in her career, had treated them, had saved them, had watched them tough through injuries that would have put normal people into shock. Stubbornness was its own kind of medicine. I'm giving you more morphine, she said. Can't afford to be fuzzy, need to stay alert. You can't afford to have your blood pressure spike from pain and blow out your stitches. You'll stay alert enough. Sarah didn't wait for permission. She adjusted the medication, watched his face relax slightly as the drug hit his system. Dutch appeared in the doorway. Perimeter secure. Got 3 guys on rotation cameras on all approaches. Anyone comes within a quarter mile will know. Good. Sarah finished her assessment. He needs rest. No visitors except medical checks. I'll be here every 4 hours to monitor vitals and change dressings. Where will you be the rest of the time? Figuring out how to keep him alive for 3 weeks. Sarah left Hayes to sleep and found Jack in the kitchen. He was making coffee in a percolator that looked older than most of the people in the house. The rich smell filled the room, cutting through the underlying scent of dust and old wood. Jack poured 2 cups without asking and slid one across the table to her. How is he alive for now? Sarah wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into her palms. The next 48 hours are critical. If infection sets in, if his lung collapses again, if any of a dozen complications develop, we won't be able to save him here. Then we keep him stable. With what I've got a field med kit and whatever supplies I can steal from the VA without anyone noticing. No CT scanner, no OR, no blood bank. We're flying blind. Jack sipped his coffee. You've done more with less. Kandahar, that village outside Mosul. The extraction in the mountains where half your equipment was blown up in the initial attack. That was different. I was different. You were younger. Doesn't mean you were better. Sarah looked at her hands. The tremor was there, faint but constant. My hands shake, Jack. What happens when I need to place a chest tube and my hands won't stay steady? Then you take a breath, you remember your training, you remember that you've done this 1,000 times, and your body knows what to do, even when your brain is screaming that you can't. Jack set down his cup. The tremor isn't weakness, it's evidence. Evidence that you survived something that should have killed you. Evidence that you're still here when a lot of people aren't. Sarah's throat tightened. She didn't cry. Hadn't cried in front of anyone except her daughter in 3 years. But the weight of it all pressed down. The responsibility, the fear, the knowledge that if she failed, Hayes would die, and she'd add one more name to the list of people she couldn't save. I'm scared, she said quietly. Good. Means you understand the stakes. Jack leaned back in his chair. You want to hear something funny? When I first met you 18 months ago at that support group, I thought you were the most arrogant person I'd ever seen. Sitting there with your arms crossed, refusing to talk, acting like you didn't need anyone. I was having a bad day. You were terrified, and you were hiding it behind walls so thick nobody could get through. Jack's expression softened. Took me 3 months to realize you weren't arrogant. You were drowning, and you were so used to being the one who saved everyone else that you'd forgotten how to ask for help. Sarah stared into her coffee. Where are you going with this? I'm going to the part where you stop trying to do this alone. You've got me. You've got the last guard. You've got an entire network of people who would walk through fire for you because you walk through fire for them. Jack tapped the table. Hayes isn't your burden to carry alone. This mission isn't your burden. Stop acting like it is. Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We know where you are. We know who's with you. Give us Hayes and the evidence, and everyone else walks away. You have 12 hours to decide. Sarah's blood went cold. She showed Jack the phone. His jaw tightened. They found us faster than expected. How? We were careful. No digital trail, no official channels. Doesn't matter how. Matters what we do now. Jack stood. I'll get the others. We need to relocate. No. Sarah set down her phone. We can't keep running. Hayes is too unstable to move. Another transport could kill him. We need to make a stand here. Against professional killers with unlimited resources. That's suicide, bitchy. It's tactical necessity. We choose the ground. We prepare defenses. We use the fact that we know they're coming. Sarah's mind was already working through scenarios, through angles of attack, through how to turn a farmhouse into a fortress. How many people can you get here in the next 2 hours? Jack looked at her for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or respect. The look of someone seeing a soldier emerge from behind civilian clothes. The last guard, 7 of us total, including me. All combat vets, all still capable, all willing. Was it 60 to 73? Sarah nodded. Good. Experience beats youth. What's our weapons situation? 4 hunting rifles, 3 handguns. Dutch and his boys have whatever they brought. That's it. This isn't an armory. Then we improvise. This is a farm. Propane tanks, fertilizer, farming equipment. Anything can be a weapon if you're creative enough. Sarah pulled out her phone and started making a list. We'll need to fortify entry points, create kill zones, set up observation posts, house the sight lines around the property. Open fields on 3 sides. Woods on the 4th, long driveway, easy to monitor. Woods are a problem. That's how I'd approach if I were them. Cover and concealment close enough to use suppressed weapons. Sarah stood. We need to make the woods unusable. Trip wires, noisemakers, something that forces them into the open. Jack was already moving toward the door. I'll get the others. We'll have 2 hours to prep. Jack, Sarah's voice stopped him. If this goes bad, if they break through, you get Hayes out. You leave me behind if you have to. Not happening. I'm serious. The mission is Hayes, not me, not anyone else. He dies, the evidence means nothing. Jack turned back and his eyes were hard. I've been on missions before where we had to leave people behind. Had to make the call between saving one and losing everyone. You know what haunted me for the next 40 years? Not the ones we lost in combat, the ones we left because the mission said we had to. He stepped closer. So no, if it goes bad, we all get out or none of us do. That's the rule. That's always been the rule. Rangers don't leave Rangers behind, and I don't give a damn what the mission parameters say. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that her life wasn't worth risking others for, but she saw the steel in his expression and knew that arguing would be pointless. "Okay," she said finally. "No one gets left behind." Jack nodded. "Now let's make sure it doesn't come to that." The last guard arrived in 2 vehicles 20 minutes later. They parked in the barn out of sight from the road. Sarah watched from the kitchen window as they climbed out. 7 people ages written in gray hair and old scars in the careful way they moved. But their eyes were clear, their hands were steady, and every single one of them moved with the quiet confidence of people who'd already survived their share of impossible situations. Jack made introductions in the farmhouse living room. Sarah recognized some of them from the VA hospital. Others were new faces, but all of them had the look. The veteran look. The one that said they'd seen things civilians never would and carried weights civilians never could. "This is Mike Torres, Force Recon, 2 tours Vietnam." A Hispanic man, 68, with hands like weathered leather and a scar running down his neck. He nodded at Sarah. "Tommy Chen, Army Ranger Gulf War." 62, Asian American, built compact and solid like a fire plug. "Elizabeth Hendricks, but everyone calls me Dutch." A woman, 68, gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She'd been an Army nurse in Vietnam. Jack had told Sarah stories. Dutch had run a field hospital through the Tet Offensive, operating under fire, saving lives while mortars fell around her. "Different Dutch from the security coordinator," she added with a slight smile. "I'm the original." Sarah looked at Dutch and felt something click into place. Recognition. Understanding. The look that passed between people who'd been there, who knew what it meant to make life and death decisions when everything was chaos and blood and screaming. Dutch smiled slightly. "Heard about you, Angel. Been waiting to meet you for years." "Why?" "Because there's not many of us. Women who served downrange, who carried the weight, who earned their place and kept it." Dutch's smile widened. "Figured we should stick together." The others were introduced quickly. Carlos Rivera, 65, Rangers. Robert Wilson, 73, Marine Corps, wheelchair-bound from an old back injury but still sharp as broken glass. Everyone called him Jim. And Marcus Webb, 60, Navy corpsman, who'd served with the Marines in Fallujah. 7 old soldiers, plus Ryan Hendricks and his security team, plus Sarah and Jack, against whatever was coming. Sarah stood at the front of the room and felt the weight of their attention. These were people who'd commanded troops, who'd led missions, who'd made decisions that determined whether their brothers came home alive or in body bags, and they were looking at her. "Thank you for coming," Sarah started. Her voice was steady. "I know Jack told you this was a mission. I know you probably have questions. Let me be direct. We're protecting a Navy SEAL commander who has evidence of a major defense fraud conspiracy. People with power and resources want him dead. They know he's here. They're coming, and we have approximately 10 hours to prepare." No one spoke. They just listened, waiting. "I'm not going to lie to you. This is dangerous. The people coming are professionals. Black ops probably. Well-trained, well-equipped, and willing to kill anyone who gets in their way. If you want to leave, if you want to walk away, no one will judge you. You've already served. You've already earned your peace." Mike Torres spoke up. "How many are coming?" "Unknown. Best guess is 6 to 12. Rules of engagement. This is U.S. soil. We can't fire first. But once they breach the property line with hostile intent, it's self-defense. We protect the house. We protect Hayes. We hold until FBI arrives or the threat is neutralized." Tommy Chen leaned forward. "What's our weapons situation?" "Limited, hunting rifles, handguns, whatever improvised weapons we can create. No grenades, no automatic weapons, no backup." Jim Wilson's voice was dry. "So basically Vietnam all over again. Outgunned, outnumbered, and expected to win anyway." Several of the others smiled grimly. "Something like that," Sarah said. "But we have advantages. We know the terrain. We choose the defensive positions. We've got more combined combat experience in this room than most active duty companies. And we're not fighting for politics or money. We're fighting for one of our own." She paused. "I'm not your commanding officer. I'm not going to order anyone to do anything. But I'm asking, will you stand with us?" The answers came quickly. No hesitation, no debate. "Hell yes. Wouldn't miss it." Rangers lead the way. Dutch looked at Sarah with eyes that had seen too much death and too much life. "We're here because Jack called. We're staying because you asked. Now tell us what you need." Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been tight for 3 years. The weight didn't disappear, but it shifted, distributed across more shoulders, shared. She pulled out a hand-drawn map of the property. Okay, let's get to work. The next 6 hours were a blur of preparation. Sarah coordinated while Jack directed. They turned the farmhouse into a defensive position using everything they had and everything they could improvise. Mike and Tommy took the woods. They strung fishing line between trees at ankle height, tied with tin cans full of rocks. Low-tech but effective. Anyone moving through in the dark would make noise. They also rigged several propane tanks with remote detonators, simple cell phone triggers that Jack assured her would work. Not lethal, but enough to create confusion and light up the night if needed. Carlos and Marcus fortified the house itself. Furniture moved to create barriers. Windows reinforced with spare plywood from the barn. Sight lines calculated. Fields of fire established. They turned the living room into a command post, the kitchen into a medical station, and the upstairs bedrooms into overwatch positions. Dutch stayed with Sarah, helping convert the kitchen into something approximating a field hospital. They had limited supplies but made do. 5 stands from bent coat hangers, instrument trays from cookie sheets, sterilization using the oven, and basic bleach solution. Not exactly Johns Hopkins, Dutch observed, organizing supplies. I've worked in worse. Sarah checked her inventory for the 3rd time. Chest seals, combat gauze, tourniquets, pain medication, antibiotics, enough to treat maybe 2 or 3 serious casualties before they ran out. Kandahar, Dutch asked. How did you know? But Jack told me about you. Not details, just enough to understand. Dutch's hands moved efficiently, muscle memory from decades of practice. I ran a field hospital during Tet, 68. We were overrun twice. Kept operating while VC were in the compound. I know what it's like to work when everything's falling apart. Sarah looked at the older woman, at the gray hair and the weathered face and the hands that still moved with absolute certainty. Does it ever get easier, the weight of it? No, but you get stronger. Learn how to carry it better. Dutch paused. The ones who couldn't carry it, they didn't make it. The suicides, the drugs, the slow death of giving up. But you're still here, still fighting. That means you're stronger than you think. I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm barely holding it together. That's because you're still fighting. Giving up is easy, looks peaceful from the outside, but you chose the hard path. Chose to keep getting up every morning, even when it hurts. Chose to keep being useful even when people tell you you're done. Dutch met her eyes. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing a person can do. Before Sarah could respond, Jack appeared in the doorway. They're early, got movement on the north side coming through the woods, multiple contacts. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. Fear transformed into focus, anxiety into action. How many? At least 8, maybe more. Professional formation, night vision, suppressed weapons. Time until they're in range. 10 minutes, maybe less. Sarah looked at Dutch. Get Hayes ready to move. If they breach the house, we evac out the back. There's a root cellar behind the barn. He can hide there while we draw them off. Dutch nodded and moved quickly toward Hayes's room. Sarah grabbed her medical bag and followed Jack to the living room. The last guard was already in position. Mike and Tommy at upstairs windows overlooking the woods. Carlos and Marcus at ground floor positions covering the driveway and side approaches. Jim in his wheelchair positioned near the back door, shotgun across his lap, ready to provide covering fire if they needed to retreat. Ryan Hendricks and his security contractors were in the most exposed positions. 3 men with actual combat experience from Iraq and Afghanistan. Young compared to the last guard, but still professional. Sarah took her position at the command post. Not because she was in charge, but because someone needed to coordinate. Someone needed to see the whole picture. Someone needed to make the calls that would determine whether people lived or died. Just like Kandahar, just like Fallujah, just like every mission where she'd been the one deciding who got treatment first, who could wait, who was already gone. Her hands started shaking. Sarah closed her eyes, took a breath. Remembered Jack's words. The tremor wasn't weakness, it was evidence. Evidence that she'd survived. She opened her eyes. Her hands were steady. All positions, radio check, she said into the handheld Jack had given her. One by one they reported in. Mike, Tommy, Carlos, Marcus, Jim, the 3 contractors, 8 defenders, plus Sarah, plus Jack who moved between positions, against at least 8 attackers who were professional killers with better equipment and no moral hesitation about murdering everyone in the house. Sarah pulled up the security camera feeds on the laptop Jack had set up. Cameras weren't great, mostly old game cameras, repurposed for security, but they showed enough. Movement in the woods, shadows that moved too purposefully to be animals. The attackers were advancing in a tactical formation, bounding Overwatch professional and careful. Contact north. Mike's voice came over the radio. 8 tangos, moving through the woods. They're about to hit our trip lines. Sarah watched the screen, watched the shadows advance, watched them reach the fishing line. The tin cans rattled. Not loud, but enough. The shadows stopped, regrouped, more cautious now. Then one of them pulled out a radio and spoke into it. Sarah's blood went cold. They've got backup. More than 8. Jack, how many more? Jack was at the window with binoculars. Got 2 vehicles on the road. Quarter-mile out. Looks like another 6 to 8 personnel. This isn't a raid. This is a full assault. 16 attackers, maybe more. Against 9 defenders, most of them over 60 years old. Sarah's mind raced through scenarios, through options, through the mathematics of impossible odds. They couldn't win this. Not in a straight fight. The attackers had numbers, equipment, and youth on their side. The last guard had experience and defensive advantage, but that would only delay the inevitable. They needed help, needed backup, needed something to change the equation. Sarah grabbed her phone and dialed Colonel Hayes' number. It rang 4 times before he answered. Mitchell, we're under attack. Multiple hostiles. Need immediate FBI response. We can't hold them off alone. FBI is 40 minutes out. Can you last that long? Sarah looked at the security feeds, at the attackers regrouping, at the vehicles approaching, at the last guard in their positions, calm and ready, but outnumbered 2 to 1. We'll find out, she said. She hung up. 40 minutes. 2,400 seconds. Every one of them would count. All positions, Sarah said into the radio. FBI is inbound, 40 minutes. We hold until then. Conserve ammunition. Choose your shots. Make them count. Mike's voice came back. Understood. We're Rangers. We've held worse positions. The attackers moved forward again. Slower now, more cautious. They'd learned the property was defended. Learned there were traps. Now they'd probe, test the defenses, look for weaknesses. Sarah watched them move, watched them communicate, watched them work with the coordination of people who trained together, who trusted each other, who knew their moms. Just like she'd known hers once upon a time. The tremor in her hands returned. She let it, accepted it, used the nervous energy to stay alert, to stay focused. Here they come, Tommy's voice. Permission to engage. Sarah looked at the screen. The attackers were 50 yards from the house, in range, moving with hostile intent, armed and dangerous. All positions, she said. Weapons free. Engage at will. Protect the house. Protect Hayes. No one gets through. The first shot cracked through the night. The muzzle flash lit up Mike Torres' position like a strobe light. One of the attackers dropped clean headshots, 60 years of muscle memory, making the impossible look routine. The others scattered, diving for cover, their professional formation breaking apart under fire from an enemy they hadn't expected to fight back this hard. Contact down. Mike's voice was calm. Reloading. Sarah watched the security feeds, her mind processing information faster than conscious thought could follow. The attackers were regrouping behind the tree line. Smart. Cautious. They'd underestimated the defense and paid for it. Now they'd adapt. They're flanking, she said into the radio. Tommy, watch your left side. Carlos, get ready for movement on the south wall. The night exploded into chaos. Suppressed weapons coughed from the darkness. Bullets chewed through the plywood reinforcements, punched holes in the walls, sent splinters flying. The old house groaned under the assault wood and glass, fragmenting, the smell of gunpowder mixing with dust and fear. Tommy Chen fired methodically from the upstairs window. One shot. Pause. Another shot. Each one deliberate, conserving ammunition, making every round count. Below him, Carlos and Marcus worked in tandem, covering each other's blind spots, moving with the practiced coordination of men who'd fought together before. They're probing for weak points, Jack said, appearing at Sarah's elbow. Blood ran down his arm from a shallow graze. He didn't seem to notice. Looking for a way in. Sarah's medical training screamed at her to treat the wound. Her tactical training told her there wasn't time. The root cellar, is it ready? Dutch has Hayes down there, sealed tight. They'd have to burn down the house to find him. An explosion rocked the east side of the property. Not the propane tanks. Something bigger. Professional grade. They brought explosives. Sarah grabbed the radio. All positions fall back to secondary defensive line. They're trying to breach. The last guard moved like they'd done this yesterday instead of 40 years ago. Mike and Tommy descended from their positions, covering each other. Carlos pulled Marcus back from the compromised south wall. Even Jim Wheelchair and all repositioned to cover the new angles of attack. Sarah saw movement on the security feed, 4 attackers advancing on the east side using the smoke from the explosion as cover. They moved with military precision, bounding Overwatch professional and deadly. She grabbed the hunting rifle Jack had left for her. Hadn't fired a weapon in 3 years. Her hands were shaking again. The old tremor mixed with adrenaline, making the rifle feel unstable in her grip. Steady, Jack's voice beside him. Not a command, a reminder. Sarah took a breath, found the first attacker in her sights, squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked. The attacker dropped. Her hand steadied. The battle raged for 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. The last guard held every position, fell back when necessary, regrouped, and held again. They fought with the efficiency of age, the wisdom of experience, the ruthless economy of people who knew that wasted ammunition meant death. But the attackers kept coming. Sarah saw the moment the line would break, saw it in the way the attackers coordinated, the way they learned the defensive pattern, the way they concentrated fire on the weakest point in the house's defenses. The west wall, where Carlos was positioned alone, covering too much ground. Carlos, fall back, Sarah ordered. They're concentrating on your position. Negative, I can hold. That's not a request. Fall back now. The wall exploded inward. Again. Not an explosion. Battering ram. 3 attackers burst through the breach, weapons up, moving fast. Carlos fired twice. Dropped one. The second attacker shot him center mass. Carlos went down. Sarah was moving before conscious thought caught up. She grabbed her medical bag, sprinted toward the breach, her limp forgotten, her hands steady, her training taking over. She reached Carlos as the attackers advanced. He was alive. Vest had caught the round, but he was dazed, weapon fallen vulnerable. Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed Carlos's rifle, fired 3 rounds at the advancing attackers. Not aiming for kills, aiming for suppression, making them take cover, buying seconds. Jack appeared, dragging Carlos back. Mike materialized from the shadows, his rifle barking. The attackers retreated through the breach. But Sarah knew in her bones, in her training, in the cold mathematical certainty of tactical assessment, they couldn't hold much longer. Then headlights cut through the darkness. Multiple vehicles coming fast up the driveway. For a horrible second, Sarah thought it was reinforcements for the attackers. Thought this was the end. Thought about her daughter, about the life she'd tried to build, about all the people she'd saved, only to die here in a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. Then she heard the sirens. FBI, federal agents poured from the vehicles as tactical gear, automatic weapons numbers, that turned the mathematics of the fight completely around. The attackers saw it too, saw that the mission had failed, saw that extraction was now the priority. They melted back into the darkness like they'd never been there. Except for one. Sarah saw him on the security feed, not retreating, advancing, moving with purpose toward the root cellar, toward Hayes. She grabbed her radio. Dutch hostile incoming on your position. 1 Tango direct approach. No response. Sarah's blood went cold. She ran. Out the back door, across the yard, her hips screaming protest with every step. The root cellar doors were open. She descended into darkness, rifle up, medical bag forgotten. The cellar was lit by a single camping lantern. Dutch lay on the ground unconscious, but breathing, blood matting her gray hair. Hayes was on his cot, trying to sit up despite his injuries. And standing over him, weapon aimed at Hayes' head, was the man from the hospital security footage. He was younger than Sarah had expected. Maybe 35. Fit. Professional. The kind of operator who'd spent his whole adult life learning how to kill efficiently. He looked at Sarah without surprise. The nurse, I wondered if I'd see you again. Step away from him. Sarah's voice was steady. Her hands weren't shaking. Can't do that. Mission's not complete. His weapon didn't waver from Hayes. But I'll give you a choice. Walk away. No one knows you were here. You go back to your quiet life. Your daughter never knows her mother died in a farmhouse protecting a seal she barely knew. Sarah's rifle was pointed at him. Center mass, easy shot at this range. How do you know about my daughter? We know everything. Part of the job. He smiled slightly. You're good, better than I expected. But you're not a killer. I am. So let me finish this and walk away. Or try to stop me and we both die. Your choice. Sarah thought about her daughter, about the promise she'd made to come home, about the life waiting for her outside this cellar. Then she thought about Marcus Hayes, about the 20-year-old kid she'd carried 3 clicks through enemy fire in Kandahar, about the oath she'd taken, about the weight she'd carried for so long. About the fact that some weights you carried until they buried you. No, Sarah said. She fired. So did he. Sarah felt the impact before the pain. Left shoulder. The bullet punched through muscle, spun her sideways, sent the rifle clattering from her hands. She hit the ground hard, her vision graying at the edges. But her shot had found its mark. The operator staggered his weapon, falling blood spreading across his chest. Not a kill shot. Close, though. He looked at her with something like respect. Didn't think you had it in you. Then he collapsed. Sarah lay on the cold cellar floor and tried to breathe through the pain. Above her, she heard voices. Jack. FBI agents, someone shouting for a medic. Hayes's face appeared in her vision. Pale. Worried. Hang on, Angel. Help's coming. Dutch, Sarah managed. She's okay. Concussion. She'll be fine. The others? Everyone's alive. You did it. You kept us all alive. Sarah closed her eyes, let the darkness take her. Sarah woke up in a hospital. Real hospital this time. St. Jude's, ironically. Different room than where she'd saved Hayes, but the same fluorescent lights, the same antiseptic smell, the same sense of borrowed time. Her daughter was sitting beside the bed holding her hand. Emma, 22 years old, home from college, eyes red from crying. Mom, Emma's voice cracked. They said you almost died. Almost doesn't count. Sarah tried to smile. Failed. How long was I out? 2 days. They had to do surgery. The bullet nicked an artery. Emma squeezed her hand tighter. What happened? They won't tell me anything. Just that you were working security for some government thing. Sarah looked at her daughter, at the fear and confusion and love in those young eyes, thought about telling her the truth, thought about the promise Hayes had made to keep Emma out of this. I was helping an old patient. Things got complicated. Sarah squeezed back. I'm okay. That's what matters. Emma nodded but didn't look convinced. The doctor says you need physical therapy. Months of it, and you can't work for at least 6 weeks. I'm fired anyway, remember? About that. A new voice made Sarah turn her head. Administrator Lancaster stood in the doorway. He looked uncomfortable. Behind him stood Colonel Hayes Jack Morrison and Dr. Chen, the young resident from that first night. Lancaster cleared his throat. Ms. Mitchell, after reviewing the events of that night in the trauma bay, and after receiving certain testimonies from Commander Hayes and Colonel Hayes regarding your service record, the hospital board has decided that your termination was premature. Sarah stared at him. You're rehiring me. We're offering you a position as Director of Trauma Training. You'd be responsible for training our residents and nurses in emergency procedures. Full-time, full benefits. Significant salary increase. I see. Sarah looked at her chin. The young woman met her eyes steadily. What changed your mind? Lancaster looked uncomfortable. Doctor? Chen filed a formal report about what really happened that night, about how you saved Commander Hayes when the entire team had frozen, about how your intervention was the difference between life and death. Dr. Chen stepped forward. I was wrong to let Dr. Thorne take credit. I was scared, of retaliation, of losing my position. But after hearing what you did at that farmhouse, protecting people you barely knew, she paused. I want to be the kind of doctor who does the right thing even when it's hard, which means starting with the truth. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, the weight shifting again. Still there, but different somehow. I accept, she said, but I have conditions. Lancaster nodded. Name them. I want Jack Morrison as my co-director. He has more combat medical experience than everyone in this hospital combined. Jack's eyebrows rose. He hadn't expected that. Agreed, Lancaster said quickly, and I want Dr. Chen as my first assistant trainer. She needs to learn not just from textbooks, but from people who've seen what happens when everything goes wrong. Dr. Chen's eyes widened. Yes, thank you. And one more thing. Sarah looked at Emma. I need 3 months off first, to heal, to spend time with my daughter, to remember what I'm fighting for. Lancaster nodded. Take 4. The position will be waiting. He left. Colonel Hayes approached the bed. Commander Hayes wanted to be here, but he's still recovering. Asked me to give you this. He held out a small box. Sarah opened it. Inside was a metal, silver star, with her name engraved. From Kandahar, Hayes said. The one you never picked up. Figured it was time. Sarah looked at the medal, at the ribbon and the star, and the weight of recognition she'd never wanted. I don't need this, she said quietly. I know, but sometimes we need to accept what we've earned, even if we don't want it. Hayes met her eyes. You saved my brother 3 times. You saved 7 old veterans. You saved yourself. That's worth acknowledging. After they left, after Emma went to get coffee, Jack sat in the visitor's chair. Director of Trauma Training, he said, fancy title. You're coming with me. Can't do it without you. Wasn't planning to let you. Jack smiled slightly. The last guard wants to help too. They're calling it the Old Guard Training Initiative, teaching the next generation what the textbooks don't cover. Sarah closed her eyes, felt the pain in her shoulder, the exhaustion in her bones, the weight that never quite went away, but also felt something else. Purpose, connection, the sense that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she needed to be. Thank you, she said, for everything. Rangers don't leave Rangers behind, Jack said, even retired ones, especially retired ones. He left. Sarah lay in the hospital bed and listened to the machines beeping, the footsteps in the hallway, the sound of a hospital that was now home. Her phone buzzed, a text from Commander Hayes. Thank you doesn't cover it, but thank you anyway. You have my 6 for life. Hayes. Sarah smiled, typed back with her good hand. Once a PJ, always a PJ. Stay safe out there. She put the phone down, closed her eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, slept without nightmares. 8 weeks later, the new Combat Trauma Training Center at St. Jude's Hospital didn't look like much from the outside. Same building, same fluorescent lights, but inside everything had changed. The training room was full, 30 residents and nurses all listening intently as Sarah Mitchell stood at the front, her left arm still in a sling, but her voice strong and clear. Most of you will never see combat, she said, but someday you'll face a situation where everything goes wrong, where the patient is dying, where protocol doesn't work, where you have to make a choice, follow the rules and watch them die, or break the rules and maybe save them. She paused, looked at the faces watching her, young, eager, scared. I'm here to teach you how to make that choice and how to live with it after. Jack stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, watching Sarah teach. Dutch was there too, recovered from her concussion, ready to share stories from Vietnam. Mike, Tommy, Carlos, Marcus, and Jim had all signed up to mentor. The last guard teaching the next generation. Chen sat in the front row, taking notes, asking questions, learning. After class, Sarah walked through the hospital, past the trauma bay where she'd saved Hayes, past the supply closet where she'd hidden to cry, past Lancaster's office where she'd been told she was too old, too broken, too much liability. She reached the memorial wall in the main lobby. New plaques had been added, 7 names. The last guard members who'd stood with her that night. Not dead, just honored. Recognized for service that had never quite ended. And at the bottom, one more plaque. Small, simple. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, 24th Special Tactics Squadron. Call sign Angel, 400 combat saves. Teacher, guardian, warrior. Sarah stood looking at it for a long time. Emma appeared beside her. Still weird seeing your name on a wall, very weird. But appropriate. Emma linked her arm through her mother's good one. I've been hearing stories from the veterans who come through here about you, about what you did. They exaggerate. Maybe, but the part where you're a hero, that's not exaggerated. Amal looked up at her mother. I'm proud of you, Mom, for who you are, for what you did, for not giving up even when it was hard. Sarah's throat tightened. I love you, kid. Love you too. They walked out together, mother and daughter, into the parking lot where Sarah's old Honda waited. As they reached the car, Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Jack. Beers tonight. The guard wants to celebrate your first month as director. No excuses. Sarah smiled, typed back. I'll be there. She climbed into her car, started the engine. Old familiar rumble. The same car that had carried her through 3 years of grief and recovery and slow rebuilding. But she was different now. Stronger. Not because the weight had gotten lighter, but because she'd learned to carry it better. Sarah drove out of the parking lot and toward whatever came next. Behind her, St. Jude's Hospital stood tall, its lights bright against the evening sky. A place where she'd been invisible, where she'd been pushed out, where she'd finally found her way back. In the rearview mirror, she saw the hospital growing smaller, but she wasn't leaving it behind. She was carrying it forward, along with everything else she'd learned. The scars, the tremor, the weight, all of it evidence. Evidence that she'd survived. Evidence that she'd fought. Evidence that some warriors never stop fighting, they just choose different battles. Sarah Mitchell drove into the sunset, heading toward a bar full of old soldiers who understood, who remembered, who knew that service never really ended. It just changed forms. And sometimes that was enough.